and welcome to episode 23 of International Expansion Explained. My guest this afternoon is Monwara Ali, who has worked within the voluntary and charity sector in roles ranging from project and community development to fundraising to governance and change management. She's a champion, truly, of the not-for-profit sector, supporting small charities and community groups in the UK and abroad. Monwara is really a huge advocate of sustainability through fundraising and the potential to sustain charitable work, community cohesion, and community development through collective action. She believes that everything we need to sustain ourselves within every community, we just need to bridge the gap between those who are the most privileged and those who are most in need. Monwara, thank you for joining me this afternoon.
Thank you, Catherine. It's such a pleasure to be here, and I loved your intro. Thank you very much for making me sound like I'm, non-stop when it comes to the charity sector. Thank you very much.
I definitely think you are. And I would just say hi to Sarita, because it's always nice when somebody gives us a quick comment right at the beginning and we know that we really are live and that other people can see it as well. So thank you. Maybe to start out, Monwara, you can give us a little bit of an introduction, how you arrived at the point that you are today, because you have a very multicultural background and you also work in a very international community as well.
Okay. So I guess my career started. Hi, Sarita. Thank you for engaging. It's very hard not to say hello. My career started off with working in the UK. In many ways, it was the public sector.
Mm-hmm.
And for as long as I can remember, London has always been a ever so multicultural world society for me growing up. Although the area that I grew up was more dense in people from my community, Bangladeshi background. So I was born in Bangladesh, raised and grew up in London. And I think my career has just, I've always been very keen to learn something new and do different things. So I've moved myself around, going from public sector to the charity sector. Even when I wasn't working, I was volunteering for the charity sector. And I think I soon discovered that's where my passion lies. And several roles, from youth worker to project manager, senior youth worker, project manager, and then fundraiser. And again, fundraising was something I came into accidentally.
Sometimes the best things, aren't they?
Of course. And I didn't even know I was a fundraiser already. So this will, for any of my colleagues at the Chartered Institute of Fundraising who listen to this, it will come as a nice little, I think it will resonate with a lot of people. So I was fundraising when I was still a teen myself at university. I remember my very first daunting challenge, which was a 24-hour fast for Oxfam. I did a 24-hour fast while the rest of the world was, well, not world, but the country was doing the same challenge with water and fluids. I did it without, because I thought, well, I can fast anyway without water and fluid. And it wouldn't be the same if I did, it would be too easy.
Oh.
So I made it hard on myself. And I did a 24-hour fast. And, by this 20th hour, I had my head on top of a pillow. I had to be in lying position because I had a throbbing headache. But it was so important for me to go from one place to another so that the people who had donated could see me.
Yeah.
And I could evidence, and that's what fundraising is. The best fundraisers manage to raise funds because they are able to demonstrate that they're actually doing it. The alignment between what I say I will do and what I actually do.
Yes, definitely. That's so important. And I mean, we said that today we're going to talk about a little bit about Ramadan and what it actually means to be observing Ramadan whilst you're working in the UK, because obviously the UK is not culturally a Muslim country, so it's not like being based, for example, in Bangladesh or maybe in Malaysia or somewhere in the Middle East where everybody around you is also fasting. Um, so maybe just to set the scene, could you give us a brief background on the main points that people should understand and should know about Ramadan? And the fact, I mean, this year Ramadan falls at the same time as Easter, almost the same time as Passover. There's also been a big festival in China. And so I think a lot of people, they know that it's the Muslim time of fasting, but they don't actually know so much more about it and what that actually means in real terms. So, for example, what is it like to be fasting at a time when a lot of the people around you are celebrating a different festival that really focuses on eating all times of the day? And I think that that's quite a challenge for a lot of people.
Absolutely. It is a huge challenge. And first of all, I have to say that I can only talk about my own experience. And it's a very relevant point, because I think because I'm Muslim doesn't mean that my experiences and how I can manage or navigate my way, especially in a leadership role, is going to be the same to other people's. Um, and making that, I think, connection as well is important. That I was born in a country like Bangladesh where it's not a Muslim country, and it might explain why, for example, the way culturally we live our lives to maybe someone who is in a Muslim country or from a Muslim country might be slightly different.
Yeah.
And I have to make that point because I, in my early childhood, we lived next door to a very heavily populated Hindu area,
Ah.
and we lived very like amicably, very good friends with our neighbors, and we leaned on each other, and we embraced each other's cultural celebrations, even though they are like completely conflicting.
Hmm.
Because in Islam you like sacrifice a cow, and in Hinduism that's a holy
Yes.
animal, and it's like completely the opposite. But those experiences have taught me so much that in my leadership role, when I'm surrounded by a diverse group of people, I can sometimes, where most people won't be as culturally aware, I may have that awareness. And
Yeah.
of course, the other side is asking when you don't know, and that is not as straightforward. So in the context of living in Britain and working in a country where it's not, I think the biggest mistake I have made is my own unconscious bias.
Okay.
And when I say that, I'll explain by giving an example. So, I have assumed, because I grew up in a very multicultural society, that most people are aware.
Hmm.
And then in my leadership roles, I've ended up in rooms where I have made the assumption that because there is one person in that organizing team or that group who might be of Muslim background, that they may have made the rest of the group aware to avoid certain important functions where maybe you might exclude a huge,
Yeah.
and I say this because there was a really good conference, and I'm not going to name it, and I really wanted to attend. And everybody I spoke to who was a Muslim person could not attend that conference. Yet the organizers organized it at a time where they knew that it was during Ramadan, and 80% of their clientele, if between 70 to 80% of their clientele might be of Muslim background.
Oh, that's really high. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's quite like sometimes you do get these situations. So my unconscious bias is making the assumption that people are aware, and
Mhm.
so therefore staying quiet. And that has made me realize that the other Muslim person in the room might have been thinking the same.
Yes.
And of course, if neither of us have said anything, we haven't been able to, we're meant to be allies in those rooms to the people we work with. You know, you're working with a group of people who may not have your cultural intelligence.
Yes.
And it's only the right thing to do to succeed as a group to make sure that you are sharing your cultural knowledge.
Yeah.
So that's and then and recognizing as well what the teams I've worked with, some people who are from maybe Saudi Arabia are practicing the way that they do things differently to somebody who might be from India, a Muslim from Somalia. And I think realizing and recognizing as well, because I push myself too hard.
Really?
You know, self-awareness is not a, and I, this is me being philosophical now, but I run a leadership program, and there is a module on self-awareness because that's the starting point of all leadership, right? But
Yes.
it's not a done deal. You don't just learn or read a book about self-awareness and you've done it. It's something that you have to constantly remind yourself. And maybe me being able to lead myself in that context, self-awareness is slightly different because it's, I need it to um, gain that self-confidence to lead myself. But when you're leading others, self-awareness is about you being conscious about how others are seeing you.
Yes.
You cannot lead by example if you are not aware of your own behavior and your actions. And I'll tell you, I'm always failing at it, falling foul at it because I go
Because
too
you're
fast.
human. Because you're human.
Yes,
But that's exactly the same as if, this question of self-awareness and your own culture. It's that thing of the fish doesn't know that it's living in water, isn't it? That you're surrounded to some extent by your own culture, be it in your family or maybe in your workplace, that you are aware that you're in a certain environment. But it's not until you have that contrast that you really realize the details of where you've come from and also where you are now. And not everybody is reflects on themselves so much that they really realize what actually um, that actually means. Sometimes they just see it as being, maybe that's just something wrong, or it's just strange, or people don't always reflect too much on the fact that self-awareness is the at the basis of all kinds of intercultural competence or leadership. As you say, if you don't know what your personal style is, it's very hard to work with others.
absolutely. It is so, so hard to work with others. And also, I think it's, you might have a personal style, but
Mhm.
not recognizing it means you can't adapt as well, because there are some environments where I have to be, you know, a little bit more directive. There are some environments where I will take a step back because it's, you know, that environment demands it. And also when you are like setting a new team together, where chaos ensues at the beginning is very important for the person in the leadership role to be a guiding force.
Mhm.
And that means leading by example. And I think this is where sometimes it becomes, I talk to managers that I mentor, and it becomes hard because inclusion is not easy,
Yeah.
because inclusion requires time,
Mhm.
and time is so precious.
And people, like you say, they also often assume that they know things about the rest of the group and assume that then level of knowledge is one thing when actually it might be something else, because they haven't actually taken the time, like you say, to ask the questions and to really follow up on what the answer actually meant in real terms.
Yeah. And because we are always, our brain is too busy thinking of the next. Are we listening? I find listening the hardest thing ever.
Yeah. People are often just listening to answer. They're often actually thinking what they're going to say on top of it, aren't they? They're not actually listening for the sake of understanding what it is that the other person is saying.
Yeah, yeah. And that is a common problem because we're going so fast.
Yeah,
Yeah.
true. Okay, maybe just to loop back a little bit, just to make sure that everybody is on the same page. You can give us basically, could you give us just a basic introduction about Ramadan and also about Eid? Because we're almost at the end of Ramadan now. And I know that Eid, I think, is dependent on the
This-
it's a lunar celebration, isn't it? And therefore the date can vary a little bit across the world.
Yes, Catherine, you're so knowledgeable in this area, and you could probably you could probably explain this better than me. So we've been fasting for 30 days,
Hmm.
and our 30 days will either end today and Eid will be tomorrow,
Okay.
or our 30 days will end tomorrow and Eid will be on Wednesday.
Okay.
And that obviously means that um, there's a little bit of complexity because there are certain countries that won't celebrate Eid on the same day. They might celebrate it on Thursday. We're hoping that we will have a united Eid in Wolfen Forest, the borough I'm based in, and we will all celebrate on Wednesday.
Okay.
Um, let's hope that. So during fasting, what I, as in my particular circumstances, I've been fortunate is being able to work from home, having a lot of flexibility and support from my team.
Hmm.
And all of that came from a place of me taking the step to explain how hard it is. I became habitually used to, if that makes sense, sounds like the same thing repeated. I got used to working far too hard and sometimes working through and not saying I need to preserve my own well-being. And of course, the way lots of people look at things is if you want something done, find a busy person,
Hmm.
which would often mean that I could end up compromising my own rest time. So, on a typical day of fasting, and no 2 days are the same, Catherine,
Hmm.
because my position, I work in a very small charity. I have a team of 12, and fundraising deadlines come out of my ears because sustainability is dependent on it. So some days I'll log off work at 5 p.m. online or 5:30, and then mad rush to the kitchen to prepare the meal. I literally have an hour, or now it's 2 hours because of the time change, and to prepare all the food, and then we eat at 7:30. Now, this is for the benefit of friends of mine that will be listening to this, or colleagues of ours who feel very uncomfortable eating or drinking around me. It might come as a surprise to you that I have to spend those 2 hours in the kitchen preparing a meal before breaking our fast anyway. So this is why we're used to it, because while you're fasting you don't have a chef coming in cooking for you. You still have to prepare your own meals. So there then the breaking of the fast usually, and this is subjective, by the way, this is personal to me.
Hmm.
Usually, because I drink coffee, within 20 minutes of like breaking my fast, praying. So we have a date and a glass of water, and then I go and pray, come back, have my full meal, and then the kettle goes on for my coffee. And I so look forward to that cup of coffee. And usually after that, I'm full of energy. And I may like catch up on things. I might check stuff, social media. So I'm usually on YouTube and LinkedIn. So I might check that. And then it's a question of doing an evening prayer and preparing the meal for the morning. So if I'm lucky, I get to bed before 10 o'clock, 10 p.m., and
Hmm.
I get a few hours sleep, wake up at 3 o'clock,
Yeah.
3 a.m. Most times, what happens is I don't get to bed by 10, and before you know it, it's midnight. I close my eyes, and by the time I fall asleep, I have to wake up again.
Hmm.
And then from 3 a.m., I eat, and I pray, and then I try and go back to sleep. And 5 a.m., by
Okay.
just after 5, by the time I go back to sleep. And
Hmm.
then if I'm lucky, I get a couple of hours sleep. Some days I don't sleep. I just go straight onto work or housework, or I still have building works on, by the way. It hasn't finished. 2 more
Oh.
days to go. So that's a typical day for me. That is a very typical day for me. So when I'm in my high energy, it's usually like 3 a.m. or 4 a.m. So for people to understand that I'm probably not the only Muslim person in a position of responsibility. There's probably loads of other people who do this, but I might write a really important email and I will save it and not send it off. And even if I do, I would never send it off that ridiculous hour. When I am sending it off, I make sure at the bottom it says, I don't expect you to respond because I'm working flexibly. That doesn't mean. And the reality is that how we lead is how others assume they are expected to lead too. So
Yeah.
therefore, I am mindful that it's not, I can't be making the assumption because I'm saying to a staff member, I don't expect you to do this, that they're actually going to listen to that. They're going to look at my behavior
Yes.
and my practice, and they're going to duplicate and replicate that. So that's why it's very important to send that message. And I think to have the conversations at work as well.
Yes. I mean, that's something that I was used to when I was traveling a lot to Asia for work, that I would say to people, look, if I'm traveling for 2 weeks on a business trip, you are going to get emails from me at, because of the time difference, you're going to get emails from me at times of day which, are outside of your working hours. Do not feel obliged that you have to respond to me at a weekend or whatever. It just means that I now have the opportunity to sit in front of my laptop. And likewise, you also have to understand that if you send me an email, I'm also not going to respond to it probably within 10 minutes because I'm busy doing other things, or I'm in a different time zone to you. So if you send me something and it's the middle of the night for me, then I'm also not going to respond straight away. So,
And that's a really important point there, Catherine, because I think I can't speak for other people, but I do find myself when I'm rushing that I tend to make assumptions.
yeah,
When
yeah,
I have some time to think and I don't respond straight away, it's going to be a much more considered way of moving forward. So we've got a question, have we, on our chat?
mm, no, you've already answered it.
Okay, okay. Yes, so I mean I'm sharing my own personal practice, and I think, and I do firmly believe that there are many people who will listen to this, who have already made the assumption that they can't work flexibly because they've never thought of asking their employer, or maybe they, like, they don't work within an establishment where their own representation of leadership is not leading by example.
Yes, yeah. I mean, how, because I think, are there some regulations around this topic in the UK? I mean, what should, are the regulations that employers need to know about to avoid discrimination and to make sure that people have opportunity to at least be able to go and pray? And I mean, surely that should be should be a right at the best of times? I have no idea about UK law anymore on these things.
I think it should be, and I think we accidentally fall foul sometimes because, in our efforts to make sure we're being diverse or equitable, um, we're not always thinking about inclusion. We accidentally end up excluding people. And I gave that example of the conference. Like, it was such a simple thing. Like, I spent there was another event. I spent the whole day there, Catherine, and from 9:30, 10 o'clock in the morning till 3 p.m. And I had such a headache by 3 p.m. And it was very heavy topic
Yeah,
that I was involved in. And I couldn't even drink a glass of water. Everyone around me had access to water, food. And like they could have organized it 2 days before Ramadan started.
yeah, yeah.
And what's interesting is like other colleagues didn't turn up. Sometimes what I find is a common practice is where it affects a person, well, slight crackling, where it affects a person, they will stay silent due to concerns of upsetting others
Yeah.
instead of thinking that perhaps if they raised it, it will help others.
It's really, I think it's really a sensitive topic, and it's not something that people need to. It's not something that people should be hiding in their work environment. But I also imagine that if you're a manager, how how do you recommend if somebody is in an environment where they think, well, I've got one or two members of staff who might be fasting, how can I approach that topic and ask that person? Because if I can imagine that in lots of cases it would feel a little bit personal, if you like, to say to somebody, are you fasting? That feels a little bit like, I don't know, if somebody hasn't mentioned it to you yourself, how can you approach the topic so that you can actually make allowances for it?
I think the real work gets done in one-to-ones. And I recognize that, especially in the certain sectors, and very much dependent on the culture of the organization. If you haven't got a culture where staff are given that kind of support, one-to-one attention, those conversations will not happen.
Yeah.
It's the kind of thing when something is a sensitive matter, you raise it on a one-to-one, not in a group scenario. But someone like myself, and I know many leaders in the charity sector of Muslim background, I think we have a responsibility to say, I put my hand up, this is affecting me. Because the moment you stand up, you're
Hmm.
standing up for everyone else that looks like you. And I know this sounds a little bit like, I don't know, promoting leadership, but that's the reality. If you and I are visible somewhere and somebody sees how we look, it gives them confidence and encouragement. It's okay. So I think as leaders of people with my background and my cultural background, do have a responsibility to be bringing up those topics so that it doesn't have to fall on the people who perhaps don't personally know the journey. So, I mean, earlier, a few days ago, I was working with a group, and there were Muslim individuals in that group,
Hmm.
and they didn't turn up, and I knew why. Because what happens is, at home during the month of Ramadan, it's a very, very spiritual time for us. For me, my priority needs to be spiritualism, prayer, charity. So you will see the last 10 days in Ramadan, you will see a lot of Muslims dedicating their time towards charity work,
Yeah.
or giving charity, or doing something charitable. Last year I did 7 days, I walked for water. It
Hmm.
was something that I saw another one of my LinkedIn contacts do, and I thought, oh, that's good. I'm going to walk 10,000 steps a day for 7 days to raise money for some charity in Africa, because I'm a Muslim and I do fasting anyway, but it would be much more rewarding to see myself go through that process that young girls
Mhm.
as young as 13, 14, 15,
Or even
fasting
further. Yeah.
in some countries and having to walk for miles to get water.
Yep.
So I think it's very important, and I keep emphasizing this because I feel like I discovered myself, and I say this, I know it's going to become my motto, or maybe it'll end up in some book. We don't know what we don't know.
Yep.
And I always remind myself because I've made the assumption so many times that I know when I haven't known. So
Mhm.
I go into a space and I always wonder, okay, what is it I don't know?
Yeah. And it's like, I always think that it's very much, it's like an onion, isn't it? That it has lots of layers to it, and you think you know because you've just unpeeled two or three layers of it, and then you realize that actually it can go deeper and that there's actually more to it, and so you think it's
And I couldn't agree more.
yeah,
It's very much like what you're saying is the whole personal development piece.
yeah.
So if Catherine Reed in a year's time won't be the same person because she will have grown because she's got an open learning mind,
Hmm.
then what I knew as Catherine is going to change,
Of course.
right? So therefore I may have known you, but you have now grown, and unless I, you know, intentionally try and find and ask you, I'm not going to know a lot of things.
Yeah. That's true. And I mean, that's why we sometimes feel that disconnect when we meet up with old friends, isn't it? That you meet somebody that you were very close with maybe 20 years ago, or maybe during university or something. And yes, you have those memories together, but you have to then try and find that common ground because you've both grown into different people, and maybe
Hmm.
those people don't have as much in common anymore, do you? So it's
Yeah, and it's the same thing with you knowing yourself, self-awareness. Who I
absolutely.
was 5 years ago, I am no longer. So
Hmm.
therefore, I have to continually work on myself and figure out who I am, because who I will be today is who I could have been 5 years ago.
Ooh, that one's getting deep.
I love dancing around.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, so why, Catherine, are you collaborating with me with this Austria
With our Austria project,
challenge? Yes.
because I also am somebody who likes to make a contribution, and because I like to also challenge myself with things. And I mean, maybe I should just explain that Monwara is bringing a small group of intrepid mountaineers, let's call them, to Austria in May to climb a mountain. And exactly which mountain it is depends a little bit on the weather conditions, because there could still be snow higher up at that time. Although it's 30 degrees here today, so you know,
Wow.
we will see. Um, and to raise money for charity. So it's going to be an exciting trip, I think, for both sides. And it means also, of course, that we're going to get to meet in person for the first time, which I'm also looking forward to very much.
Absolutely. I'm just so excited. I can't wait. Um, and that what you just said in terms of how our values are similar,
Yes.
and this is where I think sometimes our cultural differences can create division. I had to just mention that. However, where cultural, because I've been asked this question before, like, where you do get conflict, how do you navigate your way around that? And my answer to that is very philosophical, which is our values are what connects us. and those values could be, you could be of whatever spiritual faith or non-believing, but um, our values are the things that we never compromise, right?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that that is, for me, it's one of the things that I always say when I'm working together with companies on commercial projects. I always say to them, you don't have to agree on every single detail, but if you want to have a long-term partner in a different country, you're going to have cultural differences because the way that that is the way culture works, isn't it? But you need to have the same kind of values if you want to have a really strong collaboration over a long period of time, because otherwise it's going to be a purely commercial transaction, and that's like building a house on sand, isn't it? It's not the true basis for a long-term collaboration. So yeah.
It's do you feel like sometimes with a lot of businesses that's a piece that's missing, the cultural awareness, the cultural intelligence?
I think a lot of companies think that they have it, but they don't know what they don't know. Like you said earlier, often even companies who are really exporting very, very much, they often um, are lacking the self-awareness to really notice. And for them, often the cultural intelligence piece or the cultural awareness piece is very much based on those externalities, things like how to be polite and like take your shoes off when you enter into this kind of and how to use chopsticks, or remember that if I'm talking to, for example, Chinese or Koreans, that you say to them, you need to say thank you more than you would at home, because that is something that in the UK, for example, we tend to say a lot
Mm.
compared to in other parts of East Asia. Yeah. So I think that people tend to be aware of those kind of things, but they tend not to be aware of actually what it means in the day to day of actually doing business. So they have it somewhere intellectually that, if they're going into a different market, that they need to behave in this way or they need to think about A or B. But when it actually comes down to it and they have to translate that into their own behavior, they find it much more difficult.
Mm,
Not the classical scenario that they learned in a seminar somewhere. People often don't make that switch over to um, really translating it into, well, I don't actually do that particular behavior. I mean, there are things that, they say to you in seminars about don't cross your legs or don't, I don't know, all these
mm,
all these kind of very external type of behaviors.
mm,
But if you think, well, that doesn't affect me, but you don't realize that you do something else that might be offensive to somebody in another culture. And at the end of the day, lots of the time, if you make a mistake when you go to another country as a foreigner, as long as you're, let's say, of not doing something deliberately to be deliberately rude, then people usually will forgive you for it if you are asking questions, trying to learn, and showing that you're actually interested in that culture, I think. And I think that that is something that a lot of businesses, they need to show a little bit more humility, and
mm,
be prepared to show that kind of vulnerability about, I don't know something, and going out and actually saying, I don't know how to do this or that, or how do you manage this topic, or how should we approach this, and really listening to what the other side are saying to them as a suggestion, even if at the end they don't agree. You don't have to agree, but just to listen and to try and understand, why is that important to the person that I'm talking to. So yeah.
mm. And you say this a lot, and it's true. I can't imagine anyone like sort of disagreeing. Is that business is between people,
Yes.
And so that relationship building piece is so important to inclusion, diversity, and cultural awareness, really, and
Hmm.
building that cultural awareness. Because if you don't develop that relationship, somebody holds a vast amount of knowledge about their own culture that you have no idea about. But if you don't build a relationship, people aren't going to be comfortable to share it with you. So therefore, you're going to be left in the dark.
Yeah.
And I say this as well, like similar to what you say. I talk about what is a business. It's a title. Is a company is just a name without its people, but
Yeah.
with the people, and you can move, change people, and it will become a different. It will have a different track record or a different culture, depending on who the people are.
Hmm. Yeah. And it will change all the time. And that is one of those things, isn't it? That I think it doesn't matter what kind of business or what kind of activity you're involved in, just because somebody works really well with you now and you're great partners, it doesn't mean that you're always going to be a perfect match for one another, because it could be that the two of you evolve in different directions, or people change, circumstances change, markets change, so many things change. And the only constant, realistically speaking, is change. And I think a lot of people, of course, humans don't like change because it's uncomfortable. Um, but I think we have to be prepared for change, open to change. And I think that the pace of change is also increasing as time goes by. And with digital and so on, I think it's always very um, let's say it's always very important to just be as open as you can to as many new influences and so on as you can. I mean, I've been lucky enough to be in different places in the world at different times during Ramadan, and sometimes it's been more comfortable than others. You know, in Turkey or Egypt for business trips, but also, for example, in Malaysia, where I would say one of the guys I met in Malaysia who worked in a place that I was staying in, he told me, well, he'd also worked in the UK for a while, one summer as a student, and in that summer, Ramadan had fallen during the summer. And so he'd found it really hard because he's from very close to the equator. So sunrise and sunset are quite fixed. So it really doesn't matter to him when in the year Ramadan falls, because the day is more or less always the same length. Whereas it was a year when Ramadan fell in June, I think. And so he had these very long UK days. And he said, oh, and I thought I was a good Muslim. And then I came to the UK. So even I think people forget that um, even for those people, if you go from one country to the next, even the same festival or even the same kind of cultural values look different, simply because the environment in which it's taking place is a different one. And yeah.
Absolutely. And I also distinguish, because I know I'm talking about my personal experience and I'm female.
Hmm.
It will
Yeah.
be very different for Muslim men. And I was talking to somebody recently because I don't think they realized. And because we don't ask the questions, we make the assumptions. But my husband, for example, will pray at the mosque. So the evening prayer during Ramadan tends to be a lengthier prayer, and the men will do it at the mosque. So there are set times they need to be at the mosque
Yeah.
to do that prayer. And if you're not there to do that prayer, you do it at home. But then you're also playing catch up. So, how a Muslim man structures his days during Ramadan is going to be slightly different. But
Yeah.
I've been in environments where people have said, well, she is a Muslim and he's a Muslim. Why are they doing things differently? Like, are we now having to cater for individual needs? I've heard that as well.
But I mean, at the end of the day, I could also imagine, firstly, I mean, here in Austria, there is quite a large Muslim population who came in, for example, from Bosnia, from Kosovo,
Oh,
um,
wow.
during the 90s. And for them, I think, especially if they're maybe the only Muslim working in, for example, in a very physical environment, it's also tough during Ramadan, because I mean Austria isn't really a country that's it's especially aware of the needs of other cultures. And I think, I assume, that dangerous word again, but I assume that for you as a woman, it's also that stress of, you have the double stress, because you have to also prepare the food, you have to also run the household, the things that you already have to do, but just with that extra layer, isn't it, during
Yeah, yeah,
time?
absolutely. Like I can tell you, it's a question you asked earlier, and I didn't really answer it. But like with Eid coming, for example,
Hmm.
so what does it look like for me? And I think many other women like myself, and maybe men as well, it's a mad rush, not knowing until 6 p.m. So round about 6 p.m., we'll know if it's Eid tomorrow or the day after.
Yep.
So I will start defrosting whatever's in my freezer, or I will, I may have already bought stuff and I have to cook. And then if I am the eldest or like someone with personal responsibility, like within the family, everyone will be at mine. So I'll be catering for maybe 20, 30 people. And also because Eid is a time where, people will just come knock on your door to say hello. And the idea is that there should always be food for to feed everyone. So I may stay up until 2 o'clock at night just doing that. And if you happen to be a baker, you put more pressure on yourself, because I'm a feeder as well. So I love to bake. So it's like I can't help it but put on a 3-course menu. So that's what Eid looks like. And then on the day of Eid, we wake up early and it's like a big queue for the bathroom, right? Because on Eid day, you will wake up, you'll have your shower, and you will wear new clothes.
Okay. Yep.
The men go off to mosque. Meanwhile, I will be preparing, making sure breakfast is ready so that they have something to eat before they go mosque. But actually, my husband's quite liberal in a sense. So if I prepare things the night before, he will say, "You don't need to wake up as early as we do. We will warm up the food. The husband and the son will eat their breakfast, go off to mosque. Meanwhile, we get ready. We have a bit more time because us women like to dress up a little bit on special occasions,
Hmm.
and then we lunch is usually a family affair. So either family will come to mine, or I will go to another family member's house, and we all have lunch together. And in the evening, it's probably another meal somewhere else, which is hard, Catherine, because if
Yep.
you haven't eaten for a whole month, I mean, I don't feel hungry at breakfast time. I won't feel hungry at lunchtime, but it takes us a bit of time to get used to the old routine again.
Yep. Yep. And it's also tiring, isn't it? That it being out of your routine is always tiring. And
Absolutely. And you talked about change and people not liking change. I think naturally, when you have your identity isn't just dictated by you being Muslim. The
yes,
fact that you are female and you're British and you are
a leader,
Bangladeshi
and
and you are,
and a mother, and
yeah,
a
uh,
wife.
it just means then that, you know, the next generation and how they identify is going to be very different to our generation. And the innovation comes in. I remember one Eid, I had a gingerbread house. We tend to now, like in the old days, it was on Eid day, all the children would receive some money, cash.
Okay, yeah.
Nowadays, we do gifts, and we have games, and that's some of the more creative, maybe those who are maybe not as uncomfortable with change. So I had a gingerbread house, and I had like maybe around 12 children in my house,
Mhm.
as well as family members. And these were like children of friends who turned up. And I decided, like I did in youth work years ago, um, scramble. So the gingerbread house was just brought and put in the middle of the room, and I counted down and I said 3, 2, 1, and everybody can jump on it. And you should have seen the mayhem, but it was fun. The kids tell me till this day they'll never forget that Eid because it was so fun. There was a rabbit, a lint rabbit inside the gingerbread house, and everyone was fighting to get at it. It was fun.
Chaotic fun.
Yes, and the thing is, I think this is the problem with the traditional way of doing things. If we don't make change, what happens is
You
um,
kill the tradition in the end.
yeah, you'd lose tradition because, oh my gosh, so glad you said that. Because children don't want to be a part of what was.
Yeah,
They are the innovators, and we need to embrace the change and the innovation they bring on board.
yeah, that's very true. That is so true.
I liked what you said about losing tradition. If you've got any examples or anything,
Well,
elaborate. That's
no,
really.
I sometimes do feel a little bit in Austria with things that sometimes traditions of, I mean, in the same way that some UK traditions were revived during the Victorian era. I feel that sometimes some Austrian traditions have been kept going, and when you actually when you actually ask people why they go and participate in that tradition, then their reasons for doing it are quite different, and they're not really interested. They're often Younger people are often not really that interested in the tradition itself. They're interested in what it for them it represents. It represents maybe a day off work. It represents an opportunity to meet with their friends, um, to sit in a morning somewhere and have a coffee and meet with friends. Or, they're not really actually interested in the original reason for the tradition. And
Mm.
I think that that happens in a lot of places. And if you're not prepared to go with those changes, then less and less people even realize what the original reason for that particular bank holiday was, for example. Or
Mm.
it's always quite surprising. There's a guy on the radio here who he does interviews with people like vox pops on the street. And he's renowned for asking, stupid questions and so on. But around a lot of the bank holidays, he go up to people and he'll say, "What bank holiday is the 8th of December, or what bank holiday is the 15th of August?" And often people come up with these really bizarre examples of what it could be, and you're just like, how do people who are obviously natives, who've obviously grown up here, not actually know what the bank holiday is, But that's
You just reminded me as I was listening to you of growing up and asking my father, why is this that way?
Mhm.
About certain traditions. And maybe he didn't know, but one thing that I remember very distinctly is he would often say, because it just is. And that doesn't really it doesn't really engage my generation or like any generation if you can't explain. And I always find the history behind certain practices really interesting. Not that I necessarily agree, but yeah, the history is really
just to
fascinating.
understand why it came out like that. Yeah.
Mm, mm.
Mhm.
It makes sense. We tend to judge less and embrace more when we do
Yeah.
understand, right? It's the understanding that matters more than, yeah, it's not what we know. Yeah, I'm thinking at the same time. Back to the mountain climb. I know that Kate has said she's looking forward to it. So, shall I give a tiny little background of?
Yes, please.
Okay, so the Climb in Austria is a fundraiser for a institute, a learning institute, not an academic one, a learning institute. I intend to start at the end of this year. So I started off with a £10,000 crowdfunder, and I've been really, really fortunate that I've had already had people donating, and part of that is also the mountain climb. Um, so prior to that, last year, I had a team, and these are not like, these are people that have just come together, a brand new team created, and we climbed Ben Nevis.
Mm-hmm.
And I always felt like the next step, like yourself, Catherine, I love a challenge. The next step would be international. So
Mm-hmm.
you always posting and rubbing it in my face how beautiful Austria looks. I always had this. I remember making a mental note, and I have a little goals book where I wrote down one of the places I need to visit, and Austria would be one of them. But then also, as alongside that, I've been developing the leadership program, the Trailblazer program. And one of the things I've realized is people need that sometimes to get started, and if they have a huge big idea that they want to do, but almost feel like going backwards and forwards with that idea. Being able to climb a mountain is a personal development journey
Yeah.
where you then realize when you're climbing that mountain, you grow and you learn and you transform. So it is a program that will continue in future. We may go back to Austria. We may go to, we've got a few other countries in mind. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm not leading, it's other people leading this time. But I think it's a really nice empowerment thing. And what's lovely is that Kate and Veronica had signed up to attend the Ben Nevis. Kate unfortunately wasn't able to make it, and I'm so happy that Kate, because I know she's a good connection of yours,
Yes.
and I think it has multiple outcomes. So the project is going to cost £50,000 to build, and it is one of my always been a dream of mine. And I decided a year ago when I set up the sewing classes in Bangladesh, I'm going to do it now. The idea is, and my why behind that, uh, Simon Sinek thing, is that I became financially independent from the age of 17 when I
Mm-hmm.
started working. And I have realized that sometimes women, especially in those countries where they struggle and they don't have the academia, yet they are so intelligent and they're running their families and their communities from, the back, not from the front.
Yes.
That these women need ways to become financially independent. So the fundraising element, the 50,000, mountain climb is just one thing. I've also running workshops. My next fundraising workshop is next Sunday, 2 till 5,
Mm-hmm.
and that also the money that comes from that will go towards the building of the institute. Also, I've
That's,
got
sorry to interrupt. That's the 14th of April, right?
yes, 14th of Sunday, 14th of April, 2 till 5, and it costs £55. Everything that I'm raising, I'm doing on LinkedIn or any of my courses, all the funding money will go towards the institute. Of course, I'm putting in from my own pocket as well. So £30,000, I'm hoping, will come from people pledging towards a classroom.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the initiatives is going to be fund a classroom in her name. So if there is someone, a grandmother, a mother, or a sister, or someone that somebody wants to fund a classroom, they would pledge £5,000 towards covering the cost of building that classroom and fully, like, sort of equipping it and
Yep.
making sure it's ready to run. Now, I have the good news is I have already one person who has pledged to donate £5,000 towards one of the classrooms, and I can't tell you what a wonderful head start it is for me.
Excellent. Excellent. And because we are pretty much at the end of our at the end of our time now. Maybe you can just tell us very briefly. You mentioned your Trailblazer leadership program.
Yeah.
Who is that for?
So the Trailblazer Leadership Program is for CEOs, chairs, founders, and it covers 6 modules. And it's an experience, a program that is very personalized to the individual. And I haven't been running it this year so far because I've been running so many other things. But again, it equips you with so many things: fundraising, thinking about sustainability, self awareness, and how to build community. How do you bring other people on board on that journey? It's quite a comprehensive program, and that's just something that people would have to personally contact me if that is something they want to do. It may be the case that I open up for one slot because it's quite based on all the other commitments I have. I
Yeah.
work part time, not full time. So I work 4 days a week, and the other time I'm doing all these other things. So that's what the Trailblazer program is. And for those who've been following me, TEDx Walthamstow.
Yes.
So we will have a live stream, Kishel and myself. Kishel is the license holder,
Right.
and we are planning at the moment. And we have stopped taking any speakers anymore because we were inundated with requests. However, TEDx is likely to be in the next 4 or 5 months. We haven't confirmed the date yet, and we haven't confirmed the venue, but more to come in a week or two.
Excellent. Watch this space, or watch your space, not my space. That's going to be very exciting for sure. So, Monwara, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day today. Um, I think it just remains for me to say to you, what would be the most appropriate way to send Eid greetings to somebody? Eid Mubarak, or what is the most appropriate greeting?
I think it should be a personal thing because if I ask someone to say Eid Mubarak, I know a colleague who doesn't like doing that. So and
Okay.
so we've got to always think about both ways. It's not just okay, what would make me happy, but what would make you happy. In
Mhm.
saying Happy Eid is just as good.
Okay.
Happy Eid, Eid Mubarak. Not Merry Christmas though, because I've had that as well, and I
No.
don't get offended.
No, but that would be a bit odd. Yeah. Okay.
So yeah, no, thank you, Catherine. It's been wonderful. You've given me lots to think about and so much to be excited about Austria. Seriously.
Yeah, and I would just like to say thank you to everybody who's taken the time to come and listen. Thank you. I can see some of you because of the comments. I know Martin was here for a bit. I've seen Sarita, Kate, of course. Kishel has been here. I'm not sure who else is here because there's a couple of people who were showing up as LinkedIn user, so I'm not quite sure.
Australia, somebody from Australia, I do feel for you. And I would say to any employer listening, anybody who's in a senior leadership role, um, don't just think about what you need to do for others, prioritize your own well-being. Discipline is very hard, but I think about your own well-being because you're not as any good to anybody if you cannot be okay yourself. So I've had to pluck the courage and tell people around me that I really feel tired today. I've got a headache. I need to rest.
Yeah. No, I think that's very important. And also for employers to understand if their staff tell them that if they're non-Muslims employers and their staff say to them, I'm not feeling good today, that they should also understand that.
Mm.
Yeah.
Great point.
Well, thank you very much. I will say goodbye for now, and we will talk soon. Thank you.
Bye.